Hello, and you guys are watching Two Therapists and a Microphone. I am Dr. Harrison Davis.
And I'm Dr. Aisha Dickerson.
This is a show about mental health, relationships, and social issues that are socially or affecting you personally.
We're two licensed psychotherapists with decades of clinical experience, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear about the situations or dilemmas that you are going through. Nothing's too big or small. Your lived experiences are important to us.
Absolutely. So today is an important show, a serious topic. After I heard the news last week about actress Regina King's son, I believe he was 26 years old and he committed suicide. Found out last week, and all the news reports that I've read about Regina King's son indicated that he grew up in a nice family, loving family, very caring. She adored him. And I think she's a phenomenal actress. So I was really surprised and a little sad when I heard about it over the news. Aisha, what was your reaction to hearing
So,
about Regina King's son?
well, as a mother, I already know that just anything happening to your child is one of the worst things. That I
Yeah.
mean, you never want anything your child to go before you go. But in addition to that, I found out via social media because everybody kept tagging her, and that kind of bothered me a lot. Even was it Beatrice King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter? She
Yep.
tagged her, and then later on came back and said, "Oh, if you retweet me, please don't tag her." But you tagged her too. I mean, because I can imagine that you wouldn't want for all these people who don't know you, who weren't there with you, who didn't know your child personally, to continue to reach out to you as if you aren't going through enough
Yeah,
already.
I agree. There's the shock and the surprise of the news, and I think a lot of us are learning like internet etiquette about how to respond when we hear about tragedies with celebrities. Yeah, I think it was a little bit inappropriate to start commenting on it before we actually heard from Regina King herself,
Have we
or
heard
even the
from her
dad.
yet?
Huh?
Have we heard from her yet? I mean,
Yeah,
has
she
she?
released a
Okay, okay,
statement. It was on Twitter, I believe, social media.
okay.
But nevertheless, all of this brought to light some disturbing trends within the Black community. And Aisha and I decided to talk about this topic, to try to educate and raise awareness to everyone within the Black community about this issue and where to seek out resources. So let me just give you some statistics that are out there. Nationwide, suicide among Black children under the age of 18 are up 71% over the past decade. In 2019, suicide was the second leading cause of death for Black Americans aged 15 to 24. And you have some more stats,
I
Aisha?
do. The death rate from suicide for Black American men was four times greater than for Black American women in 2018. For
Yeah.
Black females, grades 9 to 12, high school age, were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 as compared to non Hispanic white females of the same age group.
Yeah, those are some outstanding numbers.
Yeah.
At one time, the white population in the United States outpaced other ethnic groups with suicide attempts and completion. that trend has now ended. Those are historical trends that are out there now. So there's a disturbing trend right now within the Black community. So today we want to talk to two individuals who know about this situation very well. We want to hear about them, about some of the signs, indicators, what can you do, and certainly some resources that are out there in case you're going through some of those problems. So, Aisha, why don't you introduce our first guest?
Yes, sir, I sure will. Our first is Miss Olive Anano, LCSW MPH, and she's a therapist in Woodstock, Georgia, specializing in suicide prevention. She's been practicing for 14 years and has a wealth of knowledge in different community resources and systems that have shaped her journey as a therapist slash public health educator. She's both a public health educator and clinical social worker, graduating with her bachelor's degree from South Carolina State University and later earning two graduate degrees from the University of Georgia. Welcome, Olive.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Our second guest is Paige Gaines. At just 31, Paige Gaines has already made a name for herself nationwide as a sought-after speaker and prominent mental health activist. A two-time suicide survivor diagnosed with bipolar at the age of 22, making her life's journey full of adversity, strength, and impact. After feeling invisible and without a purpose for the first 24 years of her life, she is now the founder and CEO of 911 Sane Jane. I like that title. With a bachelor's in public relations from Kennesaw State University, she understands the importance of community education and awareness. Welcome to the show, Paige.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Gotcha. So, Olive, why don't you first tell us? You're the therapist here, and this is your specialty. How did you make a decision? How did it come about where suicide prevention and awareness became your specialty?
For me, I think it started way back in about 2009. That is when I was pregnant with my son, and then after giving birth to my son, I experienced some postpartum depression. And during that time, you hear the word suicide, suicide. Sometimes it's very hard to come out and say, I'm thinking about ending my life. But for me, because I'm originally from Uganda, and I do have a strong supportive system in Uganda. And therefore, the question came, how do I tell my family that I'm thinking about ending my life? It was hard because my first language is not English, it's Acholi. And that word, suicide, doesn't really have a translation to it.
Oh,
So there's the assumption that if the word doesn't exist, then maybe the act doesn't exist. And I remember talking to my support system, and the first thing they told me was, get over it.
Mm.
mm,
And we hear that quite a bit, not just in my hometown of Uganda, but also in the communities in Georgia that I have been part of. Just get over it. Or, are you serious? You know, just doubt, self doubt. But I also think that there is fear and lack of knowledge and a
yeah.
lot of stigma.
Yeah, and some
And
sounds like some disbelief too. That how dare you think about doing something so drastic is what it sounds like.
yes, yes. And I've had this over and over again. Someone thinking about ending their life is selfish. But the person who is having those thoughts doesn't think of it as selfish. They're thinking of it as ending a pain, ending a psychological pain, emotional pain, physical pain. They're to the point where they are not able to derive a solution to whatever they're going through. And
Suffering.
unfortunately, they choose suicide as a solution to something insoluble. So after realizing that I didn't really have the support that I needed, I therefore started doing my research. And my research landed me at the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. I realized that it's a national institution. There's a ton of resources there, and therefore I started diving deeper. If this is preventable, what can I do as a therapist?
Mm,
Which led me to equipping myself in learning more about the treatment modalities that work in addressing suicidality and addressing someone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide. It can be serious thoughts of suicide, or it can be fleeting thoughts, where once in a while you think about it. But again, being equipped to help that person that comes in front of me and says, hey, I'm not okay. I have been thinking about suicide. And
Wonderful.
it also took me a little bit deeper because now I became aware
Mhm.
of the risk factors, of the warning signs. So regardless of where I am, if you verbalize that or if you say, I'm not feeling well, it hasn't been easy, or I haven't slept, I'm going to ask you, are you thinking about ending your life?
Thank you. Olive, I want us to come back and talk about those risk factors and what we're going to look for, because I know that's what we should look for. I know that's what our listeners and viewers want to hear. How can they help? But before we get to that page, I'd like for you to tell us your story. Tell us about how you got here.
No, absolutely. So I am a two-time suicide survivor. My first attempt, I was 12 years old. I was experiencing a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety starting at about 10 years old. So I was 2 years in, dealing with these challenges, and being a Black woman or a Black young girl at that time, I did not feel as if I had the right to speak up and to say, hey, these are my feelings. This is what's going on. Because in our household, it was, hey, you have clothes on your back, you got food in your belly, and you got a house over your head. So it's really not much room for you to be upset or for you to complain about what's going on. So me having that understanding, I kind of kept it to myself, and I was a survivor and still am a survivor, but I decided to not share. And it took for me to become 22 years old, and I was hospitalized for a second attempt. And that's when I was given my diagnosis. But that was also when my parents found out about my mental health history, which released and revealed that I had an attempt when I was at 12 years old. Given that information, I kind of knew that, or not kind of, I actually knew that this was not a topic in my family, let alone within our community. We were very lost when it came to figuring out our resources. What were our options? What do our doctors look like? Where do we go just to handle this situation in its entirety? How do we navigate this system? So moving forward, I just kind of vowed to myself that I would be that transparent individual, and I would share my experience and the experience of my family in order to help someone else. And moving forward in my career, I actually went to Athens, Georgia, and worked with the Zero Suicide Grant. That's where I met Olive, and we worked together in training police officers and doctors and social workers and QPR, which is a suicide prevention training. And I just began to educate myself and to continue my efforts within the community. And it's been very beneficial to see that being transparent can save a life.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that you're here to
Yeah.
tell your story and using your passion to help others too. So, Olive, as I listened to Paige and some of the turmoil that she was going through, what are some typical signs that you would see from someone who is really struggling? I know you asked the question when clients come and see you, but what about that layperson? How can they recognize someone who is in the same emotional place that Paige described to us?
Before talking about the warning signs, let's talk about the risk factors.
Okay.
Because at some point in time, every one of us is at risk. And the risk factors can be divided up into health, whereby you might be diagnosed with a serious mental illness or a serious health physical ailment. Or it can be environmental. Environmental meaning that you might have access to drugs or alcohol or a firearm. And also you might be raised in an environment where there is experience of childhood trauma, and also a history of suicide attempt, and also a history of mental health disorders. So those are risk factors. At some point in time, I really think all of us can be at risk because situations change, our support systems change, our environment change. So given that we have risk factors, how can we identify the warning signs? So the warning signs, these are things that we can see or we can hear or we are made aware of when someone is struggling. And it can be what someone says. Someone might outright say, I've been thinking about killing myself. Or they might say, I don't have a reason to live. This is something that is outright coming out of their mouth. They're talking about it. So you do also have behaviors. There's some behaviors that insinuate someone is struggling. One of them is lack of sleep. Someone who hasn't slept in a long period of time, finding ways of how they can go to sleep. And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals that have died trying to sleep, but actually they end up ending their life. And then you also have increased use of drugs and alcohol. That's another behavior as well. And then there are individuals that will plan or change a will, or they might start going to church very often, or they might say goodbye to family members. And the most common one is isolation, social isolation, staying away from the support system that you're familiar with. That happens quite a bit. And unfortunately, with COVID going on right now, it's been very, very hard, especially within our communities, to reach those that are isolated, the elderly being a very high risk group that has experienced isolation. And also aggression. These are situational signs that may happen very, very quickly. And divorce is another one as well. Someone is experienced or going through a divorce, and they've lost hope and they're helpless, and they become isolated. They're looking for solutions. They have a loss. They've lost their family. They've lost their children. They've lost their home. They have to start over. So the warning signs really are a lot. I cannot exhaust all of them, but those are the
Right.
main ones. Yes, it's a lot.
Well, I mean, because that's what I was thinking. A lot of this kind of just sounds like, and of course, not to diminish all the things that people who are feeling suicidal go through, but it sounds like, regular life, things that we can never stop, especially right now with COVID. We can't help being isolated in times when people are sent into quarantines, or when you test positive for COVID through no fault of your own, and now you have to quarantine, or
Mhm.
people are dying because of
Out of a
COVID, or
job.
people, right,
Yeah.
people are
Yes.
dying just because people die, or people are drinking more. Alcohol sales have gone through the roof since
Mhm.
COVID started. So I
Gun
mean, all
sales
these
too.
things, right? Exactly. So all of these things that are um, factors, or things to look out for, are just things we're seeing more of anyway.
Mhm. And also with the younger population,
Mm.
Okay.
bullying and being distressed, and a lot of times they will not verbalize it to the parent or a trusted adult, but they will talk to their friends. And
Gotcha.
sometimes for me as a parent, I can tell when my child is not being the typical 11-year-old.
Yeah. And
Isolation, spending time on social media and not talking to me, and grades are going down, and just spending time in his room a lot.
So Paige, as a survivor, what is it that you would say to someone who's feeling suicidal? Like, what is the message that you want to put out there for anyone who might be watching and feel like, I hope I get the message I need tonight from someone who's been through what I'm going through? What would your message be?
My message would be is that you're not alone. There's help out there. There are plenty of resources out there. We're having conversations like this. There are individuals that are skilled and that they're trained in order to provide you with those resources, in order to have those conversations, being equipped to say, hey, this is what's going on with me. This is how I need help. Being able to verbalize that. That's a difficult conversation. Being able to
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, I'm suicidal, or to say, hey, this is what my needs are. That was a challenge for me. So just knowing that there is opportunity to have that conversation, there are warm places for you to be. You're not alone. I wish that was a message that was given to me. It wasn't until my second attempt where I was asked the question directly, which was, "Are you suicidal?" And I think a lot of stigma
mm,
is said that don't ask that person because you're going to put the thought in their head, and that's not true.
Yeah.
If anything, you're actually relieving them of that strife and of that loneliness, and saying, hey, I see you, right? I see what you're going through. I see that you're struggling, to let me ask you this question. So not being afraid to ask that question, and then finding some type of comfort in having that conversation and asking for what you need.
Thank
thank you
you.
for sharing that. Yeah, it sounds like one of the hurdles that's out there also is within the Black community. As I heard Paige talk about her story, and how you overcome some of those barriers, Olive, to help people. But there's a perception that you don't deserve to feel helpless or bad, or perhaps you need to be stronger than that. Tell us how that complicates this situation, Olive, with people who are feeling suicidal and they're isolated and they're actually trying to reach out for help. Tell us about the community and what we are doing to either help or hamper the situation.
I think historically within the Black community, there's been this men don't cry, or little boys don't cry. You have to be strong, right?
Tough.
Or you have to be tough. You have to be strong. And therefore, if you have a young person or someone who is thinking about suicide, telling someone or telling a trusted adult is not a sign of being strong, because already this has been drilled in your head for a long period of time. And therefore, it is that silence. You will suffer in silence. And therefore, we need to break that. We need to break that and encourage talking about it, and also using the right language. There are so many of us that use the word committed suicide. You commit a crime. Is suicide a crime? And therefore, changing that language to died by suicide, or saying so and so is manipulative, attention seeking. Instead of using those words, change them and describe the kind of behavior that this individual is exhibiting. And I also think within the Black community, we always seek help in churches. That is where we go for help. And therefore, we have to equip our churches, we have to equip our leaders. When someone comes to them and says, hey, I've been thinking about suicide, it's okay, we can pray with this individual, but give them more. There are experts in the community out there that can help. Very similar. If I'm having lung problems, I'm going to go to a pulmonologist. If I'm having heart problems, I'm going to go to a heart doctor. So if you're experiencing suicidal thinking, you've had an attempt before, you've had a family member that has attempted before, and you're struggling to process it, look for someone who can address the suicidal thinking or the suicidal behavior. Because just going to someone who is a general therapist might not be able to help you. So diving into those resources that have proven to help in the long run, the support is there. The support definitely is there. Both me and Paige are trainers in QPR, Question, Persuade, and Refer. We've trained some churches within the Atlanta area, and we are available to do that training. It's a very simple training. If someone tells you that they're thinking about ending their life, whether direct or you've seen a pattern in their behavior changing, or they've experienced a loss, how do you ask the question? You can ask directly or you can ask indirectly. And then how do you persuade them? I'm pretty sure all of us are persuaded, especially when you see like a nice outfit online. And you're like, oh, okay, let me buy it. It's going to fit right? And then when you buy it, it doesn't fit right. But guess what? You were persuaded with that visual advertisement, right? And therefore, we have to persuade that person. It might be the very first time they're asking for help. Just tell them there is help out there and I can get you to it. And fortunately enough, within the state of Georgia, we do have the crisis and access line that they can call, or the National Suicide Hotline, or texting the crisis line, the 741-741. The resources are there. And we don't have to suffer in silence when there is help out there.
I'm particularly interested in knowing what are the additional or the unique steps that we would take for our teens and preteens, because I have to admit that it hit me, Paige, when you said the age when you first attempted, or when you were first a survivor of suicide. I know that myself and Harrison both have 12-year-old girls. So it was like,
Right.
I'm already imagining preteen girls. I mean, she's so dramatic, and, I want to know what to look for. But at the same time, I'm like, you're crying, but you're always crying. So, what are some additional unique, not just things we would look out for, but things that I need to make sure I'm doing?
Great
No,
question.
absolutely. I would say the very first thing is everything, take it seriously. I cried a lot as a child, but I was crying for a reason, whether it had been I had a bad day at school or I was extremely depressed. I still needed to have that conversation. I still needed to process those emotions so they didn't build up so much. So we're also taught to take every sign seriously. If you have any doubt in your head, if you're thinking suicide, we're taught go ahead and ask that question. So just being aware of their behavior, asking them what good happened today at school, asking them what bad happened today at school, covering all bases, having that open conversation. And like Olive said, recognizing those signs. And isolation was a huge sign for me. My parents just kind of thought, well, she's a loner. She likes being by herself. She doesn't want to be bothered, right? She's a teenage girl. She just wants to be on her phone and in her room. That may be true, but sometimes you got to pop your head in and say, hey, what's going on? Let's go watch some TV together. Or you can sit on your phone next to me while we're watching TV together or something of the sort. So taking everything seriously and keeping that extra eye out. Granted, sometimes it is hormones, but you can't differentiate when it is and when it isn't. So making sure we take all those signs seriously.
Thank you for sharing that. And Olive, what I heard from Paige is she was really saying the parent needs to be active, actively involved in the kid's life. You got to participate. You got to be connected, to the kid. But tell us about that friend or that coworker or that church member, who may feel overwhelmed or they don't want to get too involved because they're not a parent. What can you say to those individuals to get them to put a little bit more effort into helping out that friend or coworker?
I think being a support and having your resources there to present to these individuals. I know sometimes it's hard, especially in families where the parent is quite busy and they sometimes don't even see their kids the whole week until the weekend. And therefore, really having, I call it a safe space where the child is allowed to talk about anything and they will not get in trouble. That is very, very important.
Absolutely. But
And
any suggestions for the adult friend or coworker of someone who may be expressing any suicidal ideation? What can you say to them to make sure they don't walk away because they're
Right.
overwhelmed?
Because we can't control
so,
grown folks. I can make
yes.
sure my kids don't have access to stuff and that they
Absolutely.
have to sit down next to me and can't
Absolutely.
move.
hmm So for the support, having that resource available. An example I would say, if let's say I have a young person at church and I know the parents are experiencing some stressors, and they verbalize to me that they're having a really hard time and they don't want to tell their mom or their dad. I introduce them to, let's say, the crisis text line,
Mhm.
and I'm like, hey, there is help out there. If you feel this way and you're not able to tell anyone or your mom is not available, this is the text line that you can use. Text help to 741-741, and you'll be able to chat with somebody who will help you understand what you're going through. And if it gets to the point where you need to be connected to a therapist, they'll do that as well. Or if you need an immediate rescue, you might be taken to the hospital. So all those options are open. But I also think that with stigma and the history of hospitalizing pretty much anyone who verbalizes suicidal thoughts and behaviors, there is that fear that if I tell, I'm going to be
Right.
Yeah.
hospitalized.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think Ace and I
going,
have both heard that from clients
Right.
before.
They're like, I'm not gonna tell because I already know what the
Yeah,
hospital
I
is
don't
like
know
if
if
you
I
don't
should
tell me.
tell you, like I'm your therapist.
yeah,
But
yeah.
But I like that idea that you just mentioned, Olive, about being equipped with some resources and a phone number, the hotline. You don't have to go and talk to the parents. You don't have to go knock on the door, or you don't have to bother that coworker. You could just say, hey, here's a resource for you. And you can call this number in case you're not aware of it and seek some help. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
So another question I have, because we're getting close to running out of time, is God forbid, we've done everything that we can and people complete suicide. What kind of support or what kind of advice would you give to the people who are living through that, being the family member that's left on the other side after their loved one has died by suicide?
So when it comes to post-intervention, it's very important to have that support. And throughout the state of Georgia, through the state office, they do have different support groups that meet individually, virtually, and also in person. And also, those are the folks that are actually at risk because they're asking the why, and they will not get an answer.
No closure.
And yes, they will not get an answer, they will not get closure. And therefore, going back to the support system, encouraging them to reach out so they can process this loss, sometimes in a group setting where they're talking to some other individuals that have had a loss as well. But also, a very important question to ask is how? How did this individual die? So it might be drug overdose, or it might be a firearm. Firearm accounts for more than 50% of all suicide deaths. And therefore, gun safety is very important within the home. Yes.
So, Paige, the final question for you as a survivor, what are you doing today to make sure you stay sane? To use a title in your company name. What do you do? What are you doing to stay happy to make sure that you don't fall back into that emotional place where you attempted suicide? What are you doing?
I'm very proactive with my mental health. So I do not take a break from therapy. That's a twice a month thing. I am very proactive when it comes to meditating, very proactive when it comes to journaling. So I have a self care diet, that you could call it, that I do every morning. But I'm also very aware, living with a mental health diagnosis, I am at risk. So if I do have a suicidal thought, if I am in a place of I no longer want to be here, I have those resources that I use. So I can call Olive. I can have a conversation with my mother. I can have a conversation with my father. But the benefit of doing so and the things I had to learn through therapy actually was learning that language of how to communicate and how to ask for what I needed. So it takes practice, it really does take consistent effort in learning that language and having that conversation. But what I do consistently is an everyday self care. Self care, we like to kind of talk about it in a manner of going to get my nails done and going to get your hair done. And that's not really what self care is. Self care is genuinely taking care of yourself in its entirety. So, taking care of your brain, taking care of your spirit, and being emotionally well. And how do we do that? Through those small habits. And for me, that happens to be meditation and writing and therapy. Huge advocate for therapy. So, thank you all for what you do.
Well, thank you for joining the show. Thank you, Olive and Paige. So, Olive, how can people contact you if, in case they want to seek some services from you?
You can contact me at olivelemcares.com. Olive, L-E-M, at lemcares.com. And I'm also on Instagram, lemcaresga. lemcaresga.
And Paige, how can people contact and find out more about your company, 911 Sane Jane?
Yes, you said it actually. It's as simple as that. Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and my website is all 911 Sane Jane. And you can DM me directly from those spaces and visit my website and get me through email that way. So it's the same all across all platforms.
Gotcha. Aisha, any final thoughts from you?
No, I just appreciate you all coming. I know that suicide is not an exciting topic, to talk about, but it's one that's important that we have to continue to talk about because the numbers they seem to be stagnant for the last few years, from what I can tell. So we just appreciate you coming and sharing this information with our viewers.
Gotcha.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to all our viewers out there. You're watching Two Therapists and a Microphone. I am Dr. Harrison Davis.
And I'm Dr. Aisha Dickerson.
And you can find us every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. broadcasting live. Thank you for watching. And I think our engineer is Robert. All right, guys. So I think I'm just going to log off because Robert, we're signing off. And if I knew how to play it, I would. Here we go. Here we go.